Thanks for joining me today. I'm glad you're here. Hope you're doing well. My name is Jarrell. I develop video games full-time for a living. Today I want to take a look at the latest Final Fantasy VII Remake Switch 2 footage that Nintendo has shared with us. I will link the original video in the description. I strongly recommend you take a look at that and you can see for yourself some of the points that I will be discussing here. Most importantly, I want to discuss the apparent use of upscaling through the use of DLSS. This is an NVIDIA technology, and it actually, unfortunately, produces some artifacting. I have seen a couple YouTube channels discuss this topic, and I was a little bit disheartened as these channels are meant to be authorities on the topic, but they were quite wrong when it came to certain aspects, and I wanted to add some perspective from a game developer's position. So other channels have said, oh, it's the Switch has lower quality assets, the Switch has lower quality hair, the Switch has worse hair than the PS5 version. But from what I've seen, the hair, in terms of the quality, the hair would be rendered through a part of the program called a shader. And a shader is basically a set of instructions that tells the game engine or the renderer how the geometry should be rendered. When I say geometry, anything that exists in a 3D space is referred to as geometry. It is the 3D model. The hair is geometry. These funny little bolts and nuts and strange shoulder pad, wherever that comes from, is geometry. And so the shader is part of the game that tells the renderer, okay, the hair needs to look like this, the hair should look like that. Now people are saying, oh, the hair is lower quality, so they are insinuating that the shader for hair on the Switch 2 version is worse than the PS5 version. And I've seen comparisons, and whether or not that's true remains to be seen, but from what I see here, the reason why hair looks worse on the Switch 2 is not inherently because they've reduced the quality of the game or any of its assets. It is due to the use of AI upscaling through DLSS. So I'm going to bring up a number of points here. Okay, so we'll start at the water tower scene here at 144. And I want to make sure I approach this topic respectfully. I am not saying that the developers of this game did a bad job. I have the utmost respect for the developers that worked on Final Fantasy Remake. What they've done is brilliant. Bringing it to the Switch is brilliant. So anything that I say here is not a criticism towards them. I'm just pointing out some things as a game developer and helping you understand why do these elements look this way on the Switch 2. Something to note here is the use of depth of field. Depth of field is a photographic technique that makes objects in one area of a scene look like they are out of focus while other objects are in focus. In this situation, we see that Cloud is out of focus and Tifa is in focus. Now, on the original Switch, this photographic technique, depth of field, is very difficult for the console to handle. It results in significant reduction of the frame rate. We see this in games like The Legend of Zelda Age of Calamity. That game uses depth of field and it causes the frame rate, which already is struggling, it causes it to be significantly lower when it is using depth of field. And this is a situation where we see that the Switch 2 handles it just fine. So that is something that the Switch 2 has a massive improvement. It's not struggling. On the Switch 2, you can mitigate, or on the original Switch, you can mitigate that issue by having the depth of field render at a lower resolution. You can have that effect actually be lower than the rest of whatever the game is being rendered, but it results in lower quality, and it looks a little bit blocky, but it is a trade-off for slightly better performance. In this situation, I see that the depth of field is at very high resolution. This tells us that the Switch 2, regardless of whatever the specs are, the technology that's built into the Switch is very good at handling this. We'll see multiple light sources showing on Tifa, and there's just something I want to point out here. For a brief moment, as Tifa walks here, you'll see a strange, odd flickering of shadow on the water tower here. Let's just have a look at that. You'll see a flicker of a shadow that comes out of place. Just there. I thought that was odd, and this isn't... Obviously, I'm not complaining or nitpicking. As a game developer, you have to find things like this. Game engines are not absolutely perfect. Sometimes they do very odd things that are just out of our control. We could spend weeks or months trying to fix a weird quirk like that, and sometimes you can't find a fix for it. You just have to work around it and try to avoid that instance from happening. Again, you'll see that flickering of the shadow here. And I just find things like that interesting and odd. And again, this isn't a nitpick or a complaint. I'm not saying the game is worse. I just find things like that interesting, both as a gamer, but as a developer, I kind of wonder, okay, now why the heck did that happen? There's nothing that should have caused that to happen. But I just find that fun and interesting to find things like that. So we do also see multiple light sources on Tifa, which I think is kind of interesting. So obviously to achieve these kind of effects, because this environment doesn't exist in real space, whoever is framing this scene has to make the characters look interesting. So you have this sort of moonlight coming from this direction, but you also have this rim light here that helps the characters stand out a bit. And that's going to cast a shadow there. The moonlight is going to cast a shadow in that direction. That's quite softer. All of this is just so interesting. I've worked for years in photography, particularly in studios where you have to frame lighting in a very specific way in order to get subjects to really pop and stand out from the background here. So something I want to point out here is we see Cloud's hair uses a high amount of physics simulation. It's not real physics. Real physics does not exist in video games. It is simply calculating and presenting something in a way that makes it look like it's reacting to movement and collision with other objects in what we would say a realistic way. And we see a lot of that. That's actually quite costly. Every game has a rendering budget. There's a rendering budget, and then there's a processing budget. This is something that can cause your frame rate to drop, but it seems like the Switch 2, particularly in this case, handles it really well. We also see that in Cyberpunk, so I would like to discuss Cyberpunk in the future. Now, something, again, I want to point out is the hair. We are up close to the hair, and it is not low resolution. Again, other YouTube channels have said, oh, the Switch 2 version has lower resolution hair, it's worse quality. We can see here the hair is high resolution. We are quite close, and then there is that physics simulation. You see the hair bouncing around. Helps it look organic and alive. So we then will now look at 158. Again, the hair is high resolution, but we actually do start seeing a little bit of artifacting here, and this is a result of the DLSS upscaling. We'll see a little bit of there, and this artifacting is present and presents itself in the form of pixels that are not connected, and they seem to be forming a halo around certain details, and it will become very apparent as we go through and look more at the rest of the footage here, and you can see some artifacting there. But overall, this is high resolution texture. They have not reduced the resolution of the hair textures. And this is where the artifacting now becomes most apparent. You'll see this mess of pixels here, and if we were to just look at this, they are not connected to each other. This is artifacting, and this is not the result of lower quality textures or lower resolution. You'll see we have motion blur, so we have processes that occur. We have rendering the scene, then we render depth of field, volumetric lighting, motion blur. We see all of that stuff has occurred. All of those processes have to be done in a very specific order. We now have the motion blur. Everything should be soft and blurry here, but we have these harsh pixels that are sticking out, which to me tells me this is not actually part of the post-processing stack or the order in which we apply visual effects. This should have been blurred by the motion blur as Cloud is turning his head, but it is not. It is harsh, sharp pixels. So this is occurring outside of whatever the game is in control of. And I will explain that more in full as we step through the rest of the video. It's going to become significantly more apparent. You'll see it a little bit here. But there's something interesting here, and I'll point it out as we go along. is as the character has appeared on screen for a longer amount of time, and as they move less, you see that the artifacting has actually disappeared, and then now it just looks sharp, crisp, the way that it's supposed to look without the pixel artifacting. And that is because the DLSS has more time to calculate, and it has time to determine, okay, the scene should look like this. But the more the character moves, the more that you see the artifacting. Let's go ahead and skip forward a little bit now. And this is the cool scene here. I don't want to retread any information that I've covered previously, so I will put a link to my previous video discussing Final Fantasy VII on the Switch 2, or Final Fantasy VII Remake. But I just think this is really cool here. We see true volumetric lighting. Volumetric lighting is a rendering technique that basically allows us to simulate a sense of depth in the game's environment. It causes the frame rate to drop because it has a high rendering cost. And again, if you'd like to learn more about that, I'll put some links in the description and at the end of the video as well. But you can see as Cloud sort of gets in the way of the light, you see that he casts, it's not a shadow, it's actually simulating a sense of darkening the air behind him. If there is dust, moisture in the air, any fog, that is being occluded so it appears darker. This is volumetric lighting, which again causes the frame rate to drop. It has a high rendering cost. This is something that the original Switch really struggled with, but the fact that we see this on Switch 2 at high resolution, because you can render the volumetric lighting and the volumetric fog, you can render that at a lower resolution to make it easier on the frame rate. This is very high resolution. You can tell because you are able to define occluding the light source and having this darker areas of light shafts. Even the Buster Sword is casting that a little bit. This just looks so cool, so fantastic, and I really like that. This tells us that the Switch 2 is very good at doing this. It's newer technology. It is able to perform this kind of calculation in an optimized manner. This is a strong console. And let's go ahead and have a look here, and you will see a few things here that it will point out. That, again, the hair is high resolution. We have subsurface scattering. Subsurface scattering, I explained it in a previous video, and I'll briefly explain it here, is simulating the effect of light entering an object, the light bouncing around the mass of the object and bouncing out the other side. It makes it look like his arm is slightly translucent, which it is. If you were to hold a flashlight up to your hand, you would see light coming through the other end. Something I want to point out here as a photographer that's just so fascinating is whoever framed this scene, I would believe has a strong understanding, probably some experience with photography. They have lit Cloud here from behind with a colder temperature of light. It's sort of this greenish blue, and a warmer temperature here, which is more prominent, that comes more from the side here, and it really helps Cloud really stand out, look dynamic in this scene, as you have a cold light here as a rim light, and then you have something of a side, a light here, and then you have somewhat of a more neutral, softer light that is lighting him from the front here, and so there isn't a clashing of colors, and it is a great visual introduction to the character. It shows off how great the game is going to look. So this is very impressive, really fantastic. So something that we do know is that the game is not going to run with the same kind of high frame rates as the PS5. The PS5 is powerful. That's strong hardware. It's meant to brute force games and just be extremely powerful, but it's not portable. The Switch 2 has to be portable, so there are going to be concessions. So this is sort of a scene, I'll let it play out, that lets us know, okay, maybe it's not going to be as smooth as PS5. If you were to compare this footage to PS5, you'll see the PS5 runs at, a significantly higher frame rate, but this is still doable. This is not unplayable. I would say this is an acceptable a concession that it's still going to provide a great, smooth gameplay experience for players. And at that point, there reaches a point where, do you really need more frames for the game to be even better? We'll now move ahead to 3 15, and I'm going to pause a number of times here, and you will see significant artifacting here, and you will see that the artifacting through the pixels of the hair are most apparent during high movement. If the camera and the character are moving at a high speed, if the character's moving a lot, the camera's moving very quickly, especially when the camera is distant from the character is when it is most apparent. You will see that it becomes more obvious. And to me, it's quite distracting. So we'll pause at 3:15 here, and you'll see there are moments where the artifacting, just there, as the camera pulls away from Cloud. Here's not so bad, but you see artifacting there, and there it's quite harsh and pixelated, and I'll bring that in just a bit so we can see it a bit more. You'll see the pixelation in his hair there. And you'll see pixelation there. And as Cloud runs, you'll see the artifacting here in Tifa's hair. It doesn't look like this on the PS5. It's quite harsh, but if you just give it a moment, because the camera angle had suddenly changed, it's suddenly looking at Tifa, the DLSS has to figure out how the hair is supposed to look, and now if we just let this play for a moment, it'll smoothen out a bit. And there's evidence of this in other scenes that are a bit better than that. So here's where it is worse. You see it's very harsh, but then it only takes about a second for it to smoothen out. And you can see a couple frames later, it actually looks better. So again, if we can just pause at the right time here. That's where it's worse. Right when the camera angle changes. Right when the camera angle changes. And then there we go. It's quite harsh. And then we'll let a couple frames pass and it smoothens out. So the longer the character is on the screen, the less artifacting we see apparent. Okay. And this is fascinating with Sephiroth. I find this very interesting here. So there's strong pixelation, artifacting there. And the hair here, this tells us that shadows are being rendered in extremely high resolution because we can see harsh pixels being cast through his hair there in the shadow. I find that very interesting. And I would like to understand this a bit more as to what is causing that. And this is where it's most apparent. You can see artifacting here in the sword, this area here. You see the pixelation in the hair. I just want to understand. I would like to see the textures up close because the textures have transparent values in them. But why does it end up looking like that? I think that's very interesting. And of course, this isn't. I'm not nitpicking. I'm pointing it out. I find it very interesting. 19 and 21. Give it a second here. This is where it is most egregious. So previously the scene had a lot of movement in it, and as soon as the frame changes, Cloud's hair, I think this looks very distracting. This is something to me as a gamer. I'm really taken out of the moment. I can't stop staring at this. It's very unpleasant to look at because I'm wondering, why does it look like that? Why does it look like a steel wool? And again, it has nothing to do with the quality of the game. They have not reduced the quality of the game. It is the AI upscaling, trying to figure out how it's supposed to make the hair look. If we let a couple frames pass, it moved a little. This is why I said the faster the character moves, the faster the camera moves, the worse it is. But you can see after a couple frames, it is tough to get there. After a couple frames, it appears smoother, and we see less artifacting, and then the motion blur, which is part of the post-processing stack, becomes more apparent, and the only harshness we see is right down there. Okay, let's go ahead and move on through. So we can see a little bit of the disconnected pixels that are just floating out of nowhere. That's again evidence of the artifacting, and If we go ahead and move through that, see, there's not really that visible because the camera angle has changed, and it shows us no, the hair is not lower resolution, the hair is still high resolution, but there's some imperfections and jaggedness here. Let's go ahead and let a frame or two pass, and you can see that that jaggedness has disappeared, and the hair looks crisp and smooth and clean, and there are no artifacts or distortions. And this proves to us this is the result. When the hair looks bad in this Switch 2 version, it's because of the AI upscaling. It's just trying to figure out how it's supposed to make the hair look, because again, everything looks the way that it is supposed to here. This is a scene where Tifa doesn't really move that fast, so it's not really such a problem. It's not highly visible. You can see it just a little bit here, but a moment later, as soon as the camera angle changes, I want you to take a look at this. So we'll step through this. Again, this is where it is the worst. And there's going to be significant issues with the Buster Sword. You'll see after images of the Buster Sword in Cloud's hair as the upscaling tries to figure out what to do. So Cloud's hair looks like steel wool. We'll let a frame or two pass. And there, you see after images of the Buster Sword, the hair does start smoothening out a little bit. And then after a couple frames pass, it looks fine. This is okay. You know, this is how it should look. We'll go ahead and let that play again, and you can see the after images of the Buster Sword there. And again, see if we can get it at just the right time here. And there you can see after images of the Buster Sword just there. And that, you know, AI upscaling is going to keep improving. It will keep getting better, but this is where we are in technology right now. So I'm not trying to be a naysayer. I'm not trying to be a negative here, but I just wanted to explain, look, this is why Final Fantasy VII Remake on the Switch 2 looks like that. Lastly, we have just a couple final things here. We'll go ahead and move to the Chocobo. So we have the Chocobo here, a bunch of pretty little sparkles. The Chocobo lands, and on his back is a creature called a Mog. And we see the particle effects. I got you. Were you about to start writing an angry comment where you said, that's not called a Mog, it's called a Moogle? Did I get you? Yeah, I know they're called Moogles. I thought I'd just poke you a little bit. So I wanted to just point out here that the particle effects are subject to the same kind of artifacting when it comes to the upscaling, but because particle effects are abstract and nebulous, they're not meant to look like anything in particular. We see that and we don't correlate that with, oh, that should look like human hair, that should look like this. So the artifacting that appears on the particles is not a big deal. And I was scratching my head for a few weeks. I was trying to figure out why the particle effects in this look so sharp, while in other situations there's motion blur. And it is because the upscaling actually makes some of that artifacting apparent, but it's not really a big deal because we accept this as an abstract concept. It's not really, you know, an issue. So I found that pretty interesting here. And we have at 4:02, we're almost done here. We have a couple final things to address. There's something here, and I'll bring up the image here, is that the upscaling artifacting does actually make some pixels, just some random unrelated bright pixels on Cloud's arm, and this is because light is passing through the train window pretty quickly and it's changing, and you know, it's not a big deal. The artifacting on his hair is apparent, and of course after, you know, a second or so it evens out and the effect becomes less apparent. But then we go ahead a couple frames and then we see artifacting from upscaling on the Buster Sword, and you see these just strange pixels here, and yeah, it is distracting, but that's just where technology is right now. Again, I'm not trying to be a negative Nancy. I'm not trying to be a downer Dan. Just want to point out what I think this is interesting, because in a couple years' time, this most likely will not be an issue, and we'll look back and we'll laugh at it and say, oh man, remember how bad AI upscaling used to be, you know, and that's just how technology goes. I find this all very, very fun. Very interesting. And I think the last thing we have to look at here is and this is a scene, unfortunately, where it is quite bad, because the AI upscaling actually ruins the effect of the subsurface scattering. Again, subsurface scattering is a rendering technique that makes it look like light is entering an object and then shining through it because the object is slightly transparent. This is where it looks pretty bad. It's very distracting. It's harsh, hard pixels. It's very dark, and the AI doesn't know that these are supposed to be lighter colors being shown through there. And I'm not sure if we step through that, it gets a little better. It does, but the camera pulls back pretty quickly, and it's hard for the AI upscaling to keep up with that. So it does get a little better as it goes on. Anyway, I hope you found that interesting. I hope this has been fun for you. I'm very much looking forward to seeing more of this game. It just looks so incredible, so fantastic. For me personally, I would really like to be able to turn off. I would like an option to disable the AI upscaling, because not just as a game developer, as a gamer, there are moments in this that are pretty bad. There are moments that are not so bad, and then moments that take me out of the scene. I'm trying to enjoy just being absorbed in this world, and you have moments that, instead of looking at the whole thing, I'm staring at the hair, and I'm thinking, when is it going to look bad? When is it going to look good? You know, and then some people won't notice it, some people won't care, and it's not really a big deal, you know? So that's what I wanted to discuss. That's why the hair looks like this on the Switch 2. If you are interested in seeing my other video where I discussed other aspects of this, then I will put the link in the description. It should be on the screen just now. Thank you very much. I'm really glad you're here. I'm grateful to you for watching and enjoying the videos. Please take care of yourselves and be well.